We already know that Zionism is a threat to humanity by mere virtue of the fact that people who are in defense of Zionism happen to be very wealthy and very powerful. It also happens to be that Israel is a Western outpost in the Middle East for the interests of the Anglo-Saxon, or rather Anglo-US kind of power conglomerate. They had their hands in the Middle East. They had their fingers in the pies of the Middle East from since British Empire, from since the dissolving of the Ottoman Empire, and by virtue of the fact that there was oil there were resources there were special interests such as the Suez Canal, for example, which is an important trading route for the world. The massive stores of oil. I mean, you wouldn't have the Islamic Revolution if it wasn't for the fact that the British and the CIA colluded to overthrow the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, leading to the sequence of events, including the puppet Shah, who was essentially installed by the US and served the interests of the West. Meanwhile, didn't really do much for the people of Iran. It wasn't really representative of the people of Iran. Was very much repressive. And so is it really a surprise that as a result of this heavy investment in the Middle East, you would have an ally in the form of Israel even though Israel in of itself is a liability for the US, you can listen to any political analyst. Israel is a liability for Western powers because Israel doesn't actually provide anything currently as of this moment, because of course it's just bleeding money and bleeding attention away from the things that the West, if you were to think about things as a game of power imbalances throughout the world, and you must dominate in order to be number one. Of course, the West, especially the US, has to compete with China. Of course, China isn't getting its hands dirty in other conflicts around the world in this knee deep, knee deep in shit way that the West is, especially the US and to a less degree the UK, and so Zionism is still kept alive because for these various reasons. Also, the cultural similarities, the fact that they have a common enemy in the form of Islam. Because of course Islam is used as a cultural kind of pinata with which they can beat on if, for example, you want to discipline the local inhabitants. The Islamic, the anti-Muslim, panic following 9/11, and it was really necessary to kind of help encourage the population and to generate that kind of fear and hostilities that led to the Iraq War. And of course, the Iraq War was to the benefit of the US and the UK Western powers. Of course, no doubt Tony Blair and all these leaders got very rich. They also reinforced regional deterrence in that you won't have leaders like Saddam Hussein being belligerently in opposition to the West, even though he wasn't necessarily as much of a violent threat during the time of the Iraq invasion. And yet they did it because, of course, any possibility of rebellion is an affront to the Western powers. So they wanted to maintain regional dominance. And of course, Israel is one of the regional players that kind of work on behalf and have shared interests. And so, of course, Zionism itself is a liability, but it is a threat as well, because people like Larry Ellison and a lot, whole swath of the Zionist billionaires who happen to be Jewish, but they're not necessarily always Jewish. Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, one of the richest people on the planet, and his position in the rankings of the richest on this planet change month to month between him and Elon Musk. There was a moment this year when he was richer than Elon Musk. And so this man has a lot of power, a lot of money, and therefore has a lot of power. And by virtue of the fact that Zionism is a very organized political ideology, there are billionaires who are there to serve it, and to see Zionism as kind of a projection of their own egoic identity, because of course any criticism of Israel is seen as a criticism of their own identity because of the very misplaced understanding that this nation state reflects them, but really it reflects an idea. It reflects racial supremacy. It reflects this mistaken idea that this was a historical land that belongs to a certain ethnicity, in this case the Jews. It's not true. The Canaanites existed prior to the founding of the Abrahamic religions. It has been there for thousands and thousands of years before the founding of Abrahamic religions, and their descendants are Palestinians. In fact, more than 80% of the average Palestinian DNA come from the Canaanite, and they existed prior to the founding of these religions. So we must be clear about facts, historical record, anthropology, DNA analysis, and stray away from these these very much delusional ideas that people have in their own self-talk, in their own egoic, grandiose. We must be clear about the facts. The facts matter. But despite the fact that these people are so incredibly erroneous in their ideas and they're not fixated to reality, they still have an impact on our freedom of speech. Larry Ellison brought up TikTok as a way to thwart and to control the grassroots awareness of what's going on in Palestine, and to control the image, control the perception of the image of Israel. But you can only do so much. You can only do so much to gaslight the population. It just means that people will have to move to another social media platform. And it also, these people know that you can shape the views of population by a constant bombardment of information, misinformation in this case. And that happened with regards to the Iraq War. And they also know that by uplifting these, these right-wing influencers, the Andrew Tates, now the next generation, who will it be? These people will be charismatic. These people will be forceful, and these people will be pro-Israeli. These people will be pro-Zionist. And so we must not lose sight of this ever. The fact that they want to control the image. The thing is, these people have misplaced, and I think they're disingenuous too, because they're constantly throwing the accusation that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. But they are using it as a deflection, as a way to uphold some moral authority, but really not understanding that the people who are most likely to stand up for Palestinian rights are the most likely to stand up for Jewish rights. It's just that these people have manipulated history to their own benefit, and therefore making a mockery of the Holocaust in a way. So Larry Ellison wants to buy, well, he's buying TikTok with another conglomerate of these very rich people. And of course, they're going to build up the algorithm from the ground up. So he owns TikTok. His son owns Paramount Pictures. They're going to own Warner Brothers. It's turning, it's like, they're just self-reporting their own need to control, desire to control everything. And let's not forget that our media is already right-wing billionaire owned, because, and it turns out that the owners of these huge, corporations and conglomerates and media empires, tend to be right-wing because, of course, they do not want democratic oversight of how wealth is distributed, because they want to keep their power. They also use cultural talking points, culture wars. They want to use divisions among society between the working class, because it benefits them instead of people actually learning about what's going on, becoming class conscious, and having those billionaires actually responsible for the shit that they put out. Fossil fuel billionaires are the next big problem. So obviously Zionism is one of the three huge problems that I foresee happening. And fossil fuel billionaires are also another big threat. Climate change is a real issue. Whatever happens day to day, it's a serious issue. Climate change scientists have been screaming from the top of their lungs about this. And it so happens that people who are understanding of the science and also aware of climate change are also pro-Palestinian because, of course, the fact that Israel is bombarding Gaza, a very small strip of land, 25 miles square. I mean, it's a very small strip of land, and they're bombarding it. A lot of CO2 is being released. A lot of the land is being destroyed. And of course, the people are of the land, and of course, they're being killed. It's a very human thing also to sympathize with the Palestinian people. So what we call the left or progressives are kind of being concentrated together in what would otherwise in the past be separate issues. Ecocide, climate change issues, is essentially the same thing, and just as important as the rights of Palestinian people and all oppressed people. Because at the end of the day, when there's oppression, there's also some form of wealth and capital to be acquired. And these people who are colonialists, these people are settler colonialists, these people are most likely to harm the land in the same way that they harm the people, because for them, power is the means, the end. They don't really care about maintaining any kind of harmony with the environment. Just look at how Israelis, what they've done in an effort to eradicate Palestinian existence and to kind of basically create a blanket of all these formerly dispossessed Palestinian towns. So what they did is they grew these non-native plants in the land, which grow very fast, from Europe, of course, but also happen to be highly flammable and not equipped for the Middle East climate. So when wildfires happen, they spread very quickly and in unprecedented ways, because the kind of the foliage that they use, the plants that they use, are not equipped. They're not designed for this kind of heat. And they've just a couple months ago, in the West Bank, 9,000 olive trees were removed. And even though olive trees are the most, Palestine shows a great, strength for building and growing olive trees. It is made for it, and yet they want to remove olive trees because they want to somehow insult, offend, and show an example of strength, might of a right. These people in the end these are Nazis, these are social Darwinists. They believe in might makes right. Even though they like to play the victim, they are ultimately the ones who are doing the victimization. They're the victim creators. And it's interesting, I watched it. I watched an interview with Norman Finkelstein, and he talks about how Israelis call the people of Gaza, or rather, when referring to the people of Gaza, that nobody is innocent there. And he says, no, actually, the opposite is true. Everyone is innocent in Gaza. Truth is, we can't, from our, obviously I don't agree with using violence. And so, and, using, terroristic activities in order to achieve your political aims. At the same time, I cannot, from my own sofa, from my own comfort of my homes, as an armchair philosopher, condemn or chastise these people, because I myself have not lived in their shoes. I can empathize with them, but I've not lived in their shoes. And we all those of us who have studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the effects of lack of nutrition, a lack of freedom, know that this affects your long-term thinking. You are desperate in your actions. You think about things in a short term, either for gratifications or short-term frustrations. These are reflected in the way that people, in Hamas acted. I don't necessarily condone what they did, but it seems irrational to condemn them, not knowing what they've gone through. And furthermore, the truth of what's happened is really obscured by the fact that it's not in the interest of Israel to want to reflect, to show the truth, what's happened. Because if Israel was to show the truth, they wouldn't have as much of a strong argument to justify their genocide. So they want to create a false impression in order to justify, the argument of sex being used as a systematic, weapon against Israelis. This has not been proven in the evidence of the 9,000 hours of video and photographic footage. This has not been evidenced. And so, we've got to be clear about, we cannot let fictions and emotional, panic, and just the fact that it's a volatile emotions, and the fact that it is so close and so cutting to the bone of, historical oppression, that we must not lose sight of the facts on the ground. We can't be autistic about it. We can't just look at things as, something as, as a doctor might do, or a surgeon might do with an autopsy. But we must also look at the facts and pay homage and honor the facts, because without the facts, everything that we're doing makes no sense. We are only living in delusion. So the facts matter. So what's happening? The second problem is that climate change is a big issue. Zionism is a huge issue because of the implications for our freedom of speech, and this is reflected in our governments, in our how apps are being used to curtail and control the way we communicate. And the third reason, of course, is the imbalance of wealth. Now, this is something that's very overly overlooked, and it's not so clear from the way that our media kind of illustrates this point. But the greater the increase of wealth and power between two disparate groups, the greater you're going to create a caste-like system whereby people are simply born into poverty, and the social mobility by which they can rise up the ranks becomes so much harder. It becomes so much more difficult. There's so much to be said about this, because it is a large topic that spans our entire economic system. But Gary Stevenson talks about this a lot, and what he has said so far is comes from a place of understanding how the economy works, how wealth is distributed, and he's even used it to his advantage, becoming a millionaire, trader. That's helped him in his rise to his wealth. But he's also somebody who's honest, and he also realizes that the ability to acquire assets in a form of housing becomes, reduced over time, because wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of a few. And so the people at the mid stratification and lower ends, they are fighting for the scraps, and the super rich, they are buying up all the assets in the form of houses. And without new housing being built, without rent controls, without controls with regards to the purchase of secondary, tertiary homes, it becomes a completely warped way of operating a society. Furthermore, this is reflected in our political system, where you have a party called Labour, which doesn't actually work on behalf of Labour, the working class. It has become hostage to the corporate billionaire class. Now, I'm not saying it's hostage in the same way that these people like Keir Starmer are helpless. I would say that Keir Starmer and these people are selected by virtue of the fact that they themselves have no real strong moral grounding and principles as their MO, as their modus operandi. And so they are easy to manipulate, they're easy to mold into whatever the most powerful people, and of course these are corporation owners, these are billionaires, can kind of control. And so these people are useful idiots for a very particular and specific and very strategic mission of these billionaires. And so they like to see the political system act in the image and to the behest and to the support of this economic system that benefits the people who are donating and also lobbying these politicians. So they don't want to cede control. And for this reason, I mean, it becomes clear that our politicians do not really respect democracy. They do not act on behalf of a society that plays some, whereby democracy plays some sort of role. These people do not truly believe in democracy. They believe in some sort of technocratic, some sort of elitist way of thinking about the world. But so far, this elitist way of might makes right, just controlling how different regions of the world through a intermediary vassal state like Israel, these things have not worked. And there must be another way. And unfortunately, I believe that this other way may not be possible unless there is a crash in the economic system or a climate change catastrophe, or people rise up as a result of the flood, our freedom of speech being infringed upon in increasingly dangerous and expansive ways, as we may see through these billionaires that own a lot of the media and are sympathetic to Zionism. I think we must continuously analyze and assess the situation, but those are the three biggest threats to civilization, to humanity as a whole. And it seems conspiratorial, but this is backed by the data. This is backed by the fact that it all follows a similar theme, that you have power concentrated in the hands of a few, because money is concentrated at the hands of a few. Yes, we can live, get by, we can live, and some of us lucky enough we can buy houses, but that is nothing compared to the great mass of wealth that is concentrated in a few people who can really control essentially how human civilization transitions and progresses. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. There's a lot more to be discussed here, but I'll stop right there. And please like, comment, and subscribe. That'd be very much appreciated. Thank you.